So we're live. It's 7:30 on the dot. I think this is the first time that I started right on time. So, Haiti Oropesa with Florida U Judge, and I'm here with one of my guests, Chris Kano, and we're going to be talking about an article that was published November 5th by the Tampa Bay Times, and it is not a there it is. Florida high school dean fired for using medical marijuana. That's the article that was published November 5th. And so Chris Kano, who is the executive director of Suncoast Normal, he's going to join me. We're going to talk about some of the issues in this article. It's a really good article, not very long, but it's chock full with a lot of issues. But let me see if I could, while we're waiting for April Griffin, who is also going to join us. She was the school board member for Hillsborough County for maybe you know more than I do with Tampa politics and Hillsborough. What am I wrong in saying 12 years? I believe it was 12 years, if I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken. Okay, so what I'm
it
trying
was
to
on the
do now
school
is
board for the better part of a decade. Yep.
really, yeah, okay, so my memory serves me well. Um, I want to try to, while we're waiting for April, and for those of you who are just joining, good evening, Heidi Oropesa with Florida U Judge. I'm here with Chris Kano from Suncoast Normal. He's the executive director, and we're gonna start the conversation. April Griffin is supposed to join us. I'm waiting for her, but we're gonna just go ahead and start. the The article again is Florida high school dean fired for using medical marijuana, and it says that Florida high school, a Florida high school dean. Why am I hearing an echo? This is are you? Am I echoing?
Here, let me mute myself.
No, don't mute it. You know what? Don't mute it. Don't mute yourself. Do you have on Facebook? Are you hearing like the the broadcast live now?
I did not see it. Let me
Okay, so
the
let's
page.
just do this. So
Oh, yeah, I see it now. Yep, it's live. We got people.
why don't you turn it off? Maybe you're getting feedback because of that.
Yeah, well, I have it muted, so it shouldn't be any issues.
Okay, great. All right, yeah, just mute it. So a Florida high school dean was fired when he tested positive for marijuana, even though he had been prescribed marijuana by a doctor who was treating him for PTSD, a disorder that he incurred while he was a Marine. And just so here, hey April. So April's joined us. Wow, look at you, looking all sexy.
You're so funny.
So could you hear me well? We're all good.
I can hear you good. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
I can hear you. I can
Hey,
hear you.
Chris.
Hey, April.
How are you?
Okay, so
All right, how you doing?
Good.
we were just mentioning you served on the school board for Hillsborough County for like 12 years, yes?
Correct.
Okay. And so we advised the public that we're going to do an analysis, a discussion on the article by the Tampa Bay Times that came out November 5th. This month, Florida high school dean fired for using medical marijuana, and I just began to. It's a short article, not very long, but it's chock full of issues that we need to discuss that are very important. This is a gentleman, a school dean, high school dean, who was fired. Just recited here from this article after he tested positive for marijuana. He was prescribed. He has a medical marijuana card. He was prescribed to it by a doctor because he had PTSD. Okay, he served as a Marine, served in the Iraq War 30 years ago, Gulf Storm. He serves, acquires PTSD, has the option, according to the article, to take opioid, but decides, because this is a smart gentleman, it appears, despite the stereotype that people that use pot um are looked at as, the people that are lazy, that are this, that it just has a bad stereotype, okay, historically. So but this gentleman, it appears based on the article, he's doing a good job. In fact, he got into this jam because he's seeing two young men fighting in the school, intervenes to stop it, which is being responsible and acting quickly and seeing a threat where children under the care of of him and the school administration could hurt each other, and he stops it, prevents an injury that could have been inflicted on one of those boys. Gets injured himself. Now it has to submit a workman's comp claim, and while he's being looked at by the workman's comp doctor, he submits a urine sample, or there's some type of diagnostic, or it was a urine test. He provides a urine test, and so the workman's comp doctor tells the school, and he gets fired. The school says that even though it's legal here, the usage of marijuana medically, it's illegal federally. So that violated school policy. And also, they made mention that he failed to notify his supervisor that he was taking medical marijuana. So the attorney that represents the school district represents the current superintendent, who's named Diane Goulet. And he tells her, look, it appears that the superintendent prior to her had already made a decision, and that she then stood by that decision. And um, she basically urged the board, saying that, look, don't let his military service cloud your judgment. That we're doing the right thing. His attorney says that it was unfortunate, Marion County School Board, to fire him. He was a good employee. Um, and he argued that it was unfair that he legally could have kept using the opioid painkiller, but he switched to marijuana, which is more effective with less side effects. I'm gonna ask here, and here's the other thing that I wanted to mention: the teachers' union, the Marion County Teachers Union, that in representative executive directors told the paper, the Tampa Bay Times, in a text that that Hickman was no more impaired than someone who took an aspirin for a headache. They implied that this is tantamount to smoking pot in the boys' room. Let's, Kano, I want to ask you about, to comment, discuss the point that's made. This man, we have recently had an opioid crisis. I haven't read in the paper or seen on TV that we've had a marijuana crisis. We've had an opioid crisis, is what we've had. Yesterday we celebrated Veterans Day. This is a man who served his country. This is a man who, I don't read in the article, nothing happened in his tenure. I don't know how long. I would have wished that the reporter said how long he'd been working with the district, right? So I reached out to his attorney. I didn't get a call back, Mark Herdman. I wanted to know how long has he had the medical marijuana card? How long, did he work without any issue as a medical marijuana patient? To see that, because it might have been that he might have never ever, he would have retired, done a great job, never had an issue until the urine. So to comment on that, Chris, this angers me. This angers me. There's no documented case that's, if someone can find it, please send it to me, of someone dying, overdosing because of marijuana. But let's look at the numbers of opioid. Let's look at the number of alcohol deaths a year annually. And we already know that opioid, we just had a crisis that Trump needed to set up a task force for. Chris, you can go now that I'm a little bit worked up.
Well, by all rights, Haiti, I believe that you should be worked up. I believe that every person in Florida, especially medical marijuana patients, should feel some type of way about being either precluded from jobs or losing their jobs because they're using a state sanctioned medicine. And that's really what this boils down to, is that the current state of marijuana policy in America is in conflict between the federal and state levels. And so we're going to continuously see this issue come up until the state of Florida actually takes some concrete action and the federal government takes concrete action to protect the rights of patients.
What can Florida do? Now, because we just talked about this the other day. There's a race now. Tell us the importance of the race in Georgia with the senators, whether the Democrats can grab a hold, gain control of the Senate. What would happen then? And what's on the hopper that could happen next? And you're a strong Democrat. I know April was. I'm an NPA. I was a Republican. I switched. I want to see results. I don't care about color, blue or red. What's going to happen if the Democrats gain control of the Senate?
There's a very good question. The MORE Act, which is sponsored by Senator Kamala Harris, now Vice President elect Kamala Harris, will actually decriminalize marijuana, remove it completely from the Controlled Substances Act. However, the future of that legislation is in doubt because Mitch McConnell has refused to take up any legislation from the Democrat controlled House, whether it's COVID relief, whether it's the criminal justice reform. I mean, he just is not having anything. He is proud of it too. He calls himself nicknamed the Grim Reaper because the Senate right now under his control is where legislation goes to die, and that is just unacceptable. Now, if the Democrats were to take the two Georgia Senate seats that are in a runoff, it would effectively create a 50-50 tie in the Senate, in which case Vice President-elect Harris, who is the sponsor of the MORE Act, would be the deciding vote on marijuana decriminalization.
April, what do you think? Tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, so I come at it from two, three, four different perspectives. I'll start with my experience in human resources and studying this when it first became medically legal. Um, First of all, it's not a prescription; it's a recommendation. So that's where people feel like there's a fuzzy line. What I had to make a recommendation to the leader of our organization as the HR director to say we are right now a drug-free workplace. That being said, when I hire someone, I don't ask them if they take any mood enhancing drugs. I can't ask them because of HIPAA whether they are
Put
taking
your can you raise your level? April, somebody just Louis
about
Goble
now.
said, put it up a little. I can't hardly hear
Can you hear
April.
me now?
Yes, maybe you guys should get closer to the mic.
All right, here we go.
Okay, so the HR, that's a great point. I want the public that's going to view this later on, to this is important stuff. HR, should you they be asking
HR
people?
should not ask questions about your medical conditions. A lot of people take Xanax for anxiety. A lot of people have to take medications for depression. There's a lot of prescribed medications that people take on a daily basis while they are at work. Now, if you're operating heavy machinery or things like that, then your company can create policies around that. But HR representatives are not allowed to ask questions about your medical history. They're not allowed to ask if you're taking any medications on a daily basis. So that's number one. Um, Number two, as a school district, when someone is on campus, they have every right to say that you should not be taking certain medications. They can't ask you if you are taking them, but they can say you shouldn't be able to take certain medications. But they don't say that about Xanax.
Right.
They
So
don't
there's
say
it's a
that
double standard.
about depression medication. They don't say that. So I see marijuana as from both the policy making perspective of an organization and from the human resources perspective, marijuana in the same class as those drugs that people take for pain, for anxiety, for depression, all of those. And if he wasn't actively taking it at work, then I disagree with the decision that school board made.
Because you know what? In the article, it says Levitt, the attorney who represents the school district, said he was given the opportunity to stop using it. So that gentleman could, as you said, very well use it in the evening when people take their Xanax or whatever meds before going to bed, right?
A lot of people take them before they go to work.
I understand, but you just said that you think that the school district could set a policy saying you can't do it during work hours, but you can't ask about that. So
Certain
how are they going to
medications
enforce that?
they could. Yeah, certain medications they could. I mean, like pain
But
pills,
how are they going to enforce that? How are you going to know?
they can't. They can't because they cannot ask those questions legally.
So I don't know about that policy being able to be implemented, but okay. So that's the second
Well,
thing. So
think about
you
heavy
disagree with the
machinery.
decision. If let's pretend You were a school board member. It
Mhm.
comes before you as a school board member. What are the discussions that need to be had? What would you have maybe been inclined to decide on the side of?
Well, that school board should have been discussing way long ago when I was trying to bring it up back in when did it become legal, Chris?
2018.
26
Oh, it
2016.
was 2016.
Yeah, so I
Yep.
was still on the board when it was on when it was going to be on the ballot when they were signing the petitions for it. And I was saying back then we need to have discussions about what this means because people are going to seek this as a medical treatment. Our policy says that you cannot smoke marijuana. What are we going to do? So school boards, school districts need to have discussions. They should have had them a long time ago, but they need to be having discussions now about what their policy looks like around this. It's not a prescribed medication, it's a recommended medication, but it is still nonetheless a medication that people use to take care of certain medical ailments, and it needs to be recognized in the same class as mood enhancing drugs, anxiety medication, pain medication, and the such.
Chris, Louis Goebel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, says no one has ever died in the history of mankind from just smoking weed. That's the truth. That's the truth. Talk about big pharma. Are they behind the feds continuing keeping the Republicans? Look, here's the thing. This is what I'm going to start doing. I just switched to NPA, and in Florida, I am going to start to try to see about helping Dems, good Dems, start winning seats in our legislature. It has to be balanced. How long have the Republicans controlled Florida for?
Since
Okay, that's
1996.
got to
For 20
change. We
years.
start have at least equal numbers of both Dems and Republicans, so no one has full control. We have to do that. If I know that a lot of Republicans are going to lose their mind if the Senate gains control, because then it'll be a Democratic president, Senate, and House. So wow, woo, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But look, I think that talk in terms of big pharma making money, then incentive to maybe have these laws still on the books, and then take. You're in favor, I'm sure. You just said that there's legislation that if the right numbers turn out, we'll be able to push that federal bill that would take marijuana out of the controlled schedule, federal schedule. Talk to us about that and big pharma.
Well, here's the thing. You touched on it. There are different stakeholders who benefit by cannabis prohibition continue to be the main policy throughout the country. Large pharmaceutical companies that are seeking to essentially take this plant and put it into a pill are benefiting. The private prison industry, like Geo Group
Mhm.
and formerly Correction Corporations of America, all benefit. And so there are definitely factors out there and groups out there that do not want to see this readily available. Now, the state of Florida definitely has opportunity, both last legislative session and this upcoming legislative session, to pass an employment protection bill. In particular, I know this because I was one of the co-writers of the legislation, and our sponsor, Representative Tina Polsky, who is now State Senator-elect Polsky, it was very good at stepping up and sponsoring this, and as well as our co-sponsors, Anna Escamani and Carlos Guillermo Smith, of championing this. Because again, no one in the state of Florida should be precluded from their job or fired from their job for being a patient for a state-sanctioned medicine. And the sad part is that, as you said, due to partisan politics and those partisan, folks having campaign donors, which represent stakeholders who benefit from prohibition, like private prisons, like big pharma, you see the Republican-controlled legislature killing bills like this in committee, never letting them have a hearing or see the light of day, let alone getting the opportunity for a floor vote. So it is vitally important that folks contact their state representatives and state senators and ask them to co-sponsor and vote for in advance the Medical Marijuana Employee Protection Act in the state of Florida.
Look, Louis is interacting. Is this an interactive show with comments? Yeah, or just a news broadcast? Nope. Interactive. We're gonna take calls today due to some technical difficulties earlier. I was unable to, but Go ahead and submit questions if you have any. You wanted to mention that, by the way, I am a disabled veteran with a card. Thank you, sir, for your service. And I'm disappointed. Here's one more from Louis. Big Pharma, with their $1 trillion machine, does not want marijuana legal. I agree with that. I mean, for those of you out there who haven't been, and I don't want to hear any more about the gateway theory. April, April, is this incredible that there's no documented case of anyone ever dying of an overdose of marijuana? It's a plant that grows from the earth, and yet it's still federally prohibited. Um, and do the comparison with the numbers, like I said earlier, with opioid, with Xanax. People have died from Xanax, painkillers.
Mhm.
They're worse. It's worse. So what's going on? Why is it that
What is it that I always say with every conversation that we have? Every single thing that happens in this country is it's all about the dollars. It's all about the campaign contributions. It's all about the money and the profit that's made and the palms that are greased and the pockets that are stuffed. That's what it's all about. But I think that people are starting um to use their vote to make it legal medically in how many states now, Chris?
Well, now in this country, we're up to 40 states that have some type of medical marijuana bill on the books, whether it's low THC, high CBD medicine, or it's full spectrum access like we have here in Florida.
Right. I mean, that's 50. I mean, we have 50 states and there's 40 of them that have said we want patients to have access to this. So I think that there's a movement in the nation, and I think that our senators and our congresspeople need to listen. I think Joe Biden is probably a lot more open to the idea. We already know that our vice president is elect is very open to the idea, but we've also have to, and I'll use so the Florida High School. This is just follow me on this for just a second. The Florida High School Athletic Association is or has been for many years a very powerful organization when it comes to high school sports, sanctioned athletics. And they have policies that override school district policies. So sometimes those would clash. And that was the other thing I would say, if we're going to participate in the Florida High School Athletic Association so that our sports are sanctioned and our students can participate and compete with other uh, counties in the state, then we need to have our policies overlay the Florida High School Athletic Association if they're so important. So we've got to get our states and our federal government in line, because right now they can't even accept cash at the dispensary. So when people go to get their medically recommended cannabis, they cannot pay with a card. They have to pay cash or some sort of app.
okay? So Gary Stein, thanks for following Gary and tuning in.
Hi,
There are
Gary.
folks for whom the only reason they're able to get out of bed, and in some instances out of hospice, has been their use of cannabis as medicine. Job performance must be the metric used for those who use cannabis as medicine to judge whether they are capable of maintaining their job with integrity. That's the truth. How do we know this gentleman? It appears he did the right thing. Imagine if this employee, the article says, just sat back and let the two students continue to fight without regard for their safety. We wouldn't be here right now. So he got himself in trouble for doing a good job. The article doesn't state any history of any problems that he was ever cited for, or that he wasn't able to perform his job well. It was just because he got injured on the job for doing a good job, intervening and protecting kids that whose he was entrusted with. And
And
now it's a hypocrisy.
it is,
It's
but
a
have you
hypocrisy.
noticed
And
hypocrisy
Americans,
for
you
Xanax?
allow this to happen. For a veteran that served us, went to war, sustained an injury as a result, a psychological one, PTSD, is medicating, being sensible, intelligent in picking of a medication that has less side effects, has never resulted in anyone dying of an overdose, yet he gets fired for that. He would have been able to keep his job if he was doing the stuff that big pharma sells that they make billions off of, to the detriment of people all the time, because we just had an opioid crisis. Whoever supports that, it's unequal protection of the law. So I'm a little hyped up,
Well,
Chris.
we still have an opioid crisis.
Right.
We still have an opioid crisis, and the other thing that we need to align, and where I was going with that too, is that you look at things like a concealed weapon permit and your medical card for cannabis. And I know that Nikki Fried has both, but I think there's probably a lot of people who would say, well, I'm not Nikki Fried. So, I don't have those same protections. And I know, Haiti, you and I talked about this in depth before the show too. I think what you found was really interesting, because the questions to buy a gun, I think my interpretation, when you buy a gun, the questions preclude you from having a medical card. But the questions for the concealed weapon permit do not necessarily preclude you from having a medical marijuana
Okay,
card.
so we're gonna segue real quickly. We didn't have that as part of, but it is a sub issue from this. So let's go ahead and delve into it. We have a couple of minutes. Um, Before we do, April, as a school board member, you think you would have sided in, your position would have been maybe to vote against firing this man?
Oh, I absolutely would have supported him and voted against the superintendent's recommendation to.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about that. Chris, we did talk not a couple of years back. We were talking about when the whole thing came out where Nikki Fried, she got both her carrying concealed weapon and her medical marijuana card. She says that she doesn't see a conflict. She doesn't see a problem. There are people whose legal interpretation analysis is that it would be risky to have both. You showed me a questionnaire, and okay, and when I read it, I thought, that is a problem, because you would have to answer truthfully, and if you didn't, you can get hemmed up with a felony or a federal crime. Or actually, no, it would be in Florida. So I think what April's saying, when you go to buy a gun, that ATF that governs that transaction, and you lie up on that application, is when you can get in trouble with the feds. But the Florida questionnaire, that would be a penalty of perjury, but as a consequence, maybe a state prosecution. Do you agree with that?
Well, here's the issue on it. There's a
And I'm
pre-qualifying
going to pull it up so
questionnaire.
that the viewers can watch it. Go ahead, keep talking.
Yeah, there's a concealed weapon preliminary eligibility determination questionnaire on the Department of Agriculture's website, which is 30 questions long. And question 25 specifically asks, are you an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance as defined by the Controlled Substances Act?
Okay.
Now, an unlawful user would be anyone who uses cannabis because it is a Schedule 1 controlled drug, and in the view of the federal government, has no medical value and a high penchant for addiction. Now, we can dispel the gateway drug myth. We can dispel cannabis addiction. But the fact is that as long as it's in that Schedule 1 status, that does create a conflict between state and federal law. However, when you actually go to do your concealed weapons permit, they don't ask you that question. That's just in the preliminary qualifying questionnaire.
I understand, but you know what? Do you have to do the preliminary one? You don't have to do the preliminary one. I think, like, if you go online, you can go straight up to apply for it. It doesn't have that preliminary question you're talking about.
Yeah. And then also understand that your medical marijuana card is under the Florida Department of Health, which is the Office of Medical Marijuana Use in the Florida Department of Health is under the purview and supervision of the governor, where the Commissioner of Agriculture handles our concealed weapons permits in Florida. So you have two distinct parts of the executive branch which don't necessarily communicate with each other or have a common database. So it's not like, because a lot of folks have that concern is, oh, well, I'm going to be on a registry as a medical marijuana patient, but then I'm also going to be on a concealed weapons registry. What happens when those get cross-referenced? And the fact is that currently in the state of Florida, those are not cross-referenced.
But it could happen.
But it could happen.
So the ideal thing is for the federal government to take it off the schedule.
That would change so much across this entire nation. Even in Florida, people are still being kicked out of nursing homes. They're being kicked out of, ALFs because in many of these places, as April had touched on, are considered drug-free workplaces. They're considered smoke-free places. And so, the sad part is that people still go to jail for this. I mean, and get kicked out and lose benefits. Congress has taken steps to protect our veterans. This year was really historic in that a congressional committee actually approved a medical marijuana bill for military veterans. It was the Veterans Equal Access Act, but unfortunately, politics still comes into play in that, when things went to conference on the budget, that just didn't make it through the Senate with conferencing. So we continuously see this holdup of, Republicans controlling the United States Senate denying our veterans access to medical cannabis therapy through their VA doctors. And even, to give credit to some local Republicans, Representative Stubbe passed an amendment that said that, the veterans should not lose any type of VA benefits for being medical marijuana patients in state sanctioned programs. So, the fact is that there are some Republicans in the House that feel a certain way, but as long as Mitch McConnell is in control of the Senate, we're not going to see any meaningful action on this. And furthermore, President Trump could, by executive order, have changed this. He could have installed attorney generals that would have taken action to change this. But both Jeff Sessions and William Barr have been, drug warriors in the sense that they want to continue cannabis prohibition. And that's why I feel it's so important that President-elect Joe Biden be pressured to finally install an attorney general that will take decisive action on medical cannabis in the event that, the Senate doesn't go the Democrats' way.
So if once Joe Biden assumes office, you just mentioned that Trump could have filed or signed executive orders. So Biden can do the same thing.
Absolutely. The Controlled Substances Act allows the president to direct the attorney general to reschedule or remove, any substance that doesn't fit the schedule in the proper sense. And all the medical research, all the scientific data, all going back to, the original control, going back to the original cannabis prohibition laws in this country back in the 30s. I mean, time and time again, the research has shown that cannabis is a vital medical therapy of helping people. And you touched on the fact that, how come we're not seeing mass overdoses? Well, the fact is that the part of your body that is affected by cannabis, the cannabinoid receptors in your brain, are not linked to respiration, unlike your opioid receptors are. Opioids themselves are a respiratory suppressant. That's why if you take too much, you stop breathing. No one has ever took too much cannabis and stopped breathing. They just went to sleep and woke up hungry and a little bit more alleviated.
Okay, so let's go ahead. Would you, Chris, would you advise somebody comes up to you, hey, look, you know what? I want to get my medical marijuana card, but I don't want to mess up my concealed weapon, or vice versa. What do you advise now currently?
Well,
is it risk? Is it a problem?
Over the past 5 years, I have fielded this question numerous times. And as I said before, with this discrepancy in federal and state policy, I always encourage people who have this question, renew your concealed weapons permit first. And, that should hopefully give the government enough time. Usually they last about 5 years. Hopefully in the next 5 years, this will be sorted out. But the fact is that renew your permit first and then apply for your medical card. That's the best way I can, advice to give people while the government figures this out. I am not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal.
Right. No one's dispensing with advice here. We're just having a discussion. So don't let our discussion be construed at all that we're dispensing with legal advice at all. You should speak to a lawyer to pay for an opinion. This, as long as MMJ is federally illegal, we will have all these problems with the government. It's true. That's the truth. Should we go real quickly, do a real quick little peek see at online Florida concealed weapon or firearm license to see this. I believe if you go through this, you can get your weapon permit of online. And this doesn't, that question that you find to be problematic is not here. Would your analysis change? Well, then go ahead and do it, and then get your medical marijuana card too. Yes, no, maybe. Let's go ahead. Let's see this. Let's go ahead and let me see if I can apply. See, it says apply for a new concealed weapon or firearm license. That's it there. I'm not a robot. And then here you put all your information. So there's, look at how many questions there are. So there's not many, there's 17. Are you applying for this license as a counselor? Da, 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 da. No. Do you hold an active certification criminal justice standards? No. Are you retired Florida law enforcement? No. If yes, okay. Have you been retired for 1 year or less? Do you qualify for an exemption from the public records law? Okay. Have you ever renounced or formally given up the United States citizenship? No. Are you currently residing in the United States? Are you a United States citizen? Are you deemed a lawful permanent resident, or have you received training with a firearm? You have to before getting approved for this. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you had adjudication of guilt withheld or imposition of sentence suspended on any felony charge? Have you had an adjudication of guilt withheld or imposition of sentence suspended on a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence? Have you been convicted, found guilty of, or had adjudication withheld on one or more misdemeanor crimes of violence? Have you been convicted or found guilty of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence? Have you been issued an injunction that is currently in force and effect that restrains you from committing acts of domestic violence or acts of repeat violence? Have you ever been adjudicated, incapacitated, committed to a mental institution, or adjudicated mentally defective? During the 3 years preceding the date of this application, have you been committed for the abuse of controlled substances, or been found guilty or convicted of a crime under the provisions of Chapter 83, which is controlled substances, or similar laws of any other state, or had multiple arrests for such offenses within the past 5 years, with the most recent arrest occurring within the past year? Do you have a problem with that question, Chris?
No, I have a problem with the Florida statute, chapter 893, in that cannabis is still considered a controlled substance.
Yeah, but your defense would be you have a medical marijuana card.
Yeah, sure. What this is more of is, have you been arrested for utilizing cannabis in a non-state sanctioned manner? So if you don't have a medical marijuana card and you've been arrested in the past 3 years, or if you were sentenced to
you're not going to answer untruthfully then.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're not going to find yourself.
I don't have any issues with this current application. This application seems to meet the muster of protecting patients' privacy and their rights.
So when we last spoke a couple of years ago, when we were kind of addressing this issue, do you feel like this questionnaire has been tweaked so that people are not prevented from getting their medical marijuana card?
As this application stands right now, I don't see why there would be any conflict in being able to apply for a concealed weapons permit and have a medical marijuana card. But again, that federal discrepancy in the laws still exists, and so you can legally be in possession of your firearm and legally be in possession of your medicine, but due to the federal Schedule 1 status, you're still committing a felony.
Okay, so is this what I'm about to say? Until that gets worked out, should Floridians who understand the injustice, the travesty of this, make sure that a Democrat holds that office that Freed holds right now?
Well,
that is ideologically positioned just like she is.
So here's the thing on that. Things can change, and someone's party affiliation does not necessarily mean that they're in favor of medical cannabis therapy. And I'll give you a prime example. Geo Group, the private prison industry, donates tens of thousands of dollars to the future Democratic majority PAC in the state of Florida. So there are Democrats in the state of Florida taking money from the private prison industry. If you have someone like that sitting in the office rather than Nikki Fried, would they rule and make these same decisions? And that is something that I really can't answer. The fact of the matter is
because private prisons want people in prison.
They want to keep their bottom line up, and that means
Mhm.
continuing this school to prison pipeline. It means continuing the war on drugs for minor possession charges. I mean, they must be losing their minds out there in Oregon for any locations they have, because Oregonians voted to decriminalize all drugs at the ballot box this past election.
I
So
know, Chris, but who does that fall on to make sure that the candidate is properly vetted?
it falls on we the people. I mean,
Okay.
all elections fall on us. We can blame our party infrastructures. We can blame the corrupt politics and the pay to play system that there is. But we the people must educate ourselves, and we the people must hold our elected officials accountable. Now, in this past election, we saw Florida go red. We saw Democrats lose seats in Congress, lose seats in the state House and the state Senate. So, what I would call on right now is, if you are a Republican, if you are a Libertarian, if you're a nonpartisan, if you're a Democrat and you live in a county or district which is currently represented by someone from the GOP, hold them accountable and demand that they take action. The Democratic Party nationally, for the first time from any major party, adopted decriminalization of marijuana as a platform plank at the DNC. You know, a lot of folks wanted full legalization as a measure. You know, they got decriminalization of taking it off the Controlled Substances Act. You know, a lot of these concerns that folks have in the, you know, in when it comes to cannabis is not just the personal attacks by police for personal possession, but also the legal cannabis industry being raided in some of these states by federal authorities, and the fact that, as April touched on earlier, many of these businesses have to operate in a cash model because cannabis banking is not a reality right now, because the federal government actually has to do that. And that's why the MORE Act is so important, because not only will it decriminalize, but it opens the door for cannabis banking as well.
Is it the Moores Act?
Yep.
Moores Act. That's what it is. So you think that if the Democrats gain control of the Senate, you think that'll pass?
If John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock win the January 5th elections in Georgia, absolutely. The MORE Act will be able to get passed through the Senate. As I said before, that 50-50 split between the folks caucusing with the Democrats and the Republicans, the deciding vote will be Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who is the Senate sponsor of the MORE Act.
April, go.
I'm waiting for the federal government to catch up with the states and what the people have been consistently saying time and time again for the past decade.
Do you want full legalization, Chris? I'm sure I'm gonna know what you're gonna answer.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because a red state like South Dakota, at the ballot box, their people both voted for a medical cannabis system and the full legalization for adult use. So the fact is that even in a Republican state, the people are the deciding factor, not the politicians. And the people at the ballot box, have time and time again said they want this. In Florida, the first time in 2014 had 58% of the vote. Granted, we have a 60% threshold, which is why you saw over 70% support in 2016, coming back stronger. Now, the Republican legislature in Florida continues to make it harder for the people to drive grassroots ballot initiatives. They want to have total control over making the laws, not we the people, which is why they put up Amendment 4 to try and make ballot initiatives have to go through 2 election cycles. The Supreme Court right now in Florida is hearing arguments over, and it regulate Florida, and also the make it legal Florida petitions. The fact is that the state of Florida can drop their challenges. They can allow this, hopefully the Supreme Court does right by the people and allow adult use to go onto the ballot. But until the Florida Supreme Court does their ballot review of the adult use initiatives, we really won't know where adult use and full legalization in Florida stands.
You want to add anything, April?
I keep saying it. We've got to catch up, and employers really do need to understand um, this medication too, because again, there's such a stigma to cannabis compared to other medications that employers, their employees are taking on a daily basis. But if this principle that we started talking about at the very beginning, if they have a workman's comp claim, and that's the only reason he was caught, because a lot of businesses don't randomly test because it's so expensive, especially if you have a lot of employees. Um, Testing is usually used when you want to get rid of somebody and you know that they are a user, that they have said to somebody at work, or people at work know. It's really something they use to get rid of people. But had he not been in a workman's comp claim, they would not have even known. So employers need to catch up as well. And even when we do get to a place where I think the people are going to drive the decision to take that off of the federal schedule, I think that the employers are still going to be way behind.
All right. It was a great conversation, great discussion. It was awesome.
Hey, Katie, if I could add one more point to what April said about workman's comp, there have been court cases in state of New Mexico, comes to mind in particular, where the Supreme Courts of those states have ruled that medical marijuana should be qualified and covered under workman's compensation. So, even in the state of Florida, workman's comp laws are a whole nother arena of statutes and laws and policies that are going to have to be updated in addition to employment and drug-free workplace laws. In particular, also, this was something that at the end of last year was a big issue. School districts themselves catching up over their students being patients in those policies. Hillsborough County now does have a policy. In September of last year, it was out of compliance. Now there is a policy. So policy updates all the way around. April is absolutely right. Local and state governments need to catch up, but the federal government in particular is still living like it's the 1970s. And even Nixon administration officials have said they put marijuana in the Controlled Substance Act as Schedule 1 because they directly wanted to harm Black and brown and anti-war communities.
Yep, and it should be a question that is posed to politicians when they're running. This is like a question that should be asked of every candidate or any person in office already that's seeking re-election, what their position is on this.
The other thing too that Chris has hit on, and he's hitting the nail on the head, is the private prison system. If you look, and I studied this a lot as a school board member too, because what I watched, and here in the state of Florida, and I remember having a conversation with a state rep about it. You watched the prison funding doing this, and at the same time school funding, and they just, you could overlay them, and they would have been almost a perfect match. They were taking monies from public education and putting it into the private prison industry. And I remember having a discussion, myself and Susan Valdez were having a discussion with a state rep, a Republican, and we were saying to him, we need to get more money in public education. And he was saying, but I need beds. And he literally said, where am I supposed to put them? I need beds. And Susan and I, at the same time, we went, school. How about that? We educate them. But there is, in every state that has a private prison system, you will see higher dropout rates. You'll see higher incarceration rates. There is money at the bottom line of it. And that's the other thing we've got to get. And I know these overlap, but it's not just a discussion about legal cannabis. It's a discussion about our private prison system. We've got to do something about that too, because they've been using marijuana to incarcerate young people of color for too long.
So they're a lobby against it because they benefit
Absolutely.
from that.
Yeah,
They want incarceration to make money.
correct.
So,
Right.
and well, the voters are going to have to try to see the conflict amongst who's sleeping with who.
Well, that's the problem, Haiti, is that it is that our system, how many folks, the average person, the average voter knows to go to the, Florida elections database, look up someone's
Well,
contribution,
that's why we're here.
try to figure that out. But here's the thing. It's not just legislative races. These private prisons, as April touched on, have big wallets and lots of checks to write. They're affecting state attorney races. They're
I
affecting
understand, Chris, but we can look at me. You're smart. There are
yeah,
activists that are smart that like to come on and inform the public. Why? Because we have we want a better community. We want a better country. We want a fair system, a better system. This is an injustice. You read this article and it's wrong. That's wrong. All kinds of wrong. To do that
yeah,
to a veteran who served, it's bad. So we're the ones that do
absolutely.
it. We're the ones that look into campaign funds. To
You
see
know,
who's
it
getting
costs more to
who's in bed with
incarcerate
who.
someone now in America than it does to send someone to Harvard. And
Mm.
that in itself, April said right on the head. If school funding keeps dropping and prison funding keeps increasing, we have to re-examine and relook at who are these people that were put in office to be our state reps and our state senators.
Yeah, that's a good point that you hit on, April, for sure. That's another one that we should, in the future, have a discussion on and start showing the public through this. I love the new technology that's come out since the pandemic. The pandemic has not all been bad. There's been, so now we have the ability to share our screen and to show people who's giving money to who is funding schools instead of private prisons. We can pull them all out there so that to put a spotlight so that the votership, the electorate, the public knows what, and they're informed completely when they go to vote. All right, it was super fun. I think this is one of the funnest ones I've done yet. It was a good. It was a good. Thanks for joining me, Chris and April, and good night, everyone. You want to say anything to leave the audience with, or you, Chris? Either of you can say good night.
Sure. If folks want to get involved with cannabis advocacy, if you care about the rights of patients, if you want to know, be in the know of what politicians are doing what when it comes to prohibition policy, go to suncoastnormal.org. Become a member today. Our executive board takes no salaries. All the money that we get as a chapter goes right back into our advocacy and public education. And if you want to make a difference, you can by becoming a member of Normal.
Is that Suncoast Normal all one?
All one word. Yep. Suncoastnormal.org.
Okay. Is that it?
There's no A. It's NORML, National Organization for the
Oh,
Reform.
sorry. I apologize. My bad.
No worries.
My bad. So normal.org. There we go. No, wait, hold on.
Still got the A on
No,
that
no,
one.
yeah, I put
There
okay,
we
so
go.
There
suncoastnormal.org.
you go. Yep.
So, folks, there you go. Go visit that website so that you can learn more about these issues. April, you want to say anything? No?
Peace.
You look awesome tonight, especially April. You're looking good, girl.
Thank you.
Peace. Everyone have a great evening. Haiti Oropesa with Florida You Judge. Thanks for tuning in and